Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to get started. Welcome to our latest Climate Reality Book Club event, a conversation with Manda Scott about her novel, Any Human Power. The Climate Reality Book Club is for both members of the Climate Reality Network and also the general public to discuss books with a wide range of themes and genres related to climate. We regularly host webinars with the authors of our selected books, which are moderated by Climate Reality staff and other experts from the field. These webinars provide a unique opportunity to engage in Q&A and commentary and learn more about what you can do to take action on climate. They're open to all, so feel free to invite your friends and family to join them. If you are a Climate Reality leader or a chapter member, you can join our book club group on Reality Hub. We use that group to announce each of our book selections and information about upcoming webinars. You can tune into that group to suggest future book selections, stay up to date with events, and see what other folks have been reading. If you don't yet have a Reality Hub account, you can contact support@climatereality.com and we will assist you. In 2025, we've partnered with our friends at the Canada branch of Climate Reality, who host small group discussions on eco-literature, and they have most recently been discussing Any Human Power. We're so excited to have Sherry from Climate Reality Canada moderating the conversation today. If you or a friend would like to join these discussions, Sherry's going to put that info in the chat. And just a final note is that this webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be shared in a follow-up email to attendees and in the book club group on Reality Hub. And throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit questions for our speakers using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Sherry.
Thank you so much, Ella. Hi, everyone. My name is Sherry Wu, and I'm joining you from Toronto, also known as Toronto, and I'm here on behalf of the Climate Reality Project Canada, the Canadian branch of the Global Climate Reality Project Network, where I work as the Community Climate Hub Manager. On the Canada branch, we typically kick off our webinar calls with a land acknowledgement, so I want to respectfully recognize and acknowledge the deep and ongoing relationship with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people across Turtle Island that stewarded the lands and waters that of so-called Canada since time immemorial. The Climate Reality Project Canada's office is based in Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, the traditional territory of the Kanekiahaga, which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe nations, Huron-Wendat, and Abenaki. We honor, recognize, and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of these lands. And as I mentioned, I'm actually joining from Toronto, which is part of the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and Wendat peoples. This land is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And with that grounding of ourselves in place and in the land beneath our feet and in the histories and stories and responsibilities that come with it, it feels like a really meaningful way to begin today's conversation, because the book, Any Human Power, that we're here to discuss, asks us to do something very similar, to listen deeply to the world around us and to imagine what it means to act with care and responsibility toward the future. So it's with that I have the profound honor of being joined today by Manda Scott. Manda Scott is an award-winning author, former veterinary surgeon, and host of the chart-topping Accidental Gods podcast. He's best known for Boudica, the Dreaming series, and is co-creator of the Throughtopia Masterclass. She is the visionary mind behind Any Human Power, a novel that weaves together collective action, ancestral responsibility, political resistance, many other wonderful things, and most importantly, a call to act and dream and think more boldly than we ever thought possible. Amanda, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Incredible. So as I had mentioned, we're gathered here today through the Climate Reality Project, and I know many of us tuning in share a deep concern for the climate crisis, as well as a commitment to build a better, more livable future for generations. So to begin, I'd love to hear about your own journey into the climate space. What brought you into this work, and how did that personal path lead to the creation of Any Human Power, which so intricately threads climate awareness with many other layers and intersecting crises through storytelling?
Thank you. So there is a long answer to that and there's a short answer, and we're going to head for the shorter answer. And the shorter answer is that it was always a part of my awareness. I grew up as a very strange child, and I remember lying on the back grass in the fields near where I lived and looking up at the sky and thinking that was the only place where people had not colonized. That wasn't the word that I used, but that's what I was thinking. And of course, it wasn't true. Then a plane flew over and I thought, oh, goodness, not even there. Um, and so a lot of my childhood was spent endeavoring to learn how to connect with the gods of this land. I live on the islands of Britain, in order to work out what we could do that would be different. And I very early on, I read a series of books by a gentleman called Alan Garner, and they were very early climate books. They were kind of Tolkien-esque, but the elves were dying because of pollution. And he wrote these in the 1950s, even before Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. But that ethos was through them, and I was devastated by the idea that we were killing these amazing beings and the rest of the web of life, even if I didn't know that word. But then I went on to be a veterinary surgeon. I got quite sidetracked into scientific veterinary practice. And it wasn't until I began practicing shamanic practice as a spirituality, still endeavoring to connect with the gods of this land. And I was really lucky that people came from Turtle Island and from Australia and from Africa and from the Sami and northern Finland to teach us, to give us the tools to connect with the gods here, because they were lost 2,000 years ago, and people who pretend otherwise are not necessarily terribly accurate. And so that became the driving force. And very quickly after I began practicing that, I started writing novels rather than being, or as well as being a vet. They kind of ran in parallel. And then I wrote the Boudica books, and I was really believed there was a whole shamanic crisis that led to that. I really believed that they were going to change the world, partly because I was told that they would. And I was endeavoring to show who we had been before the Romans came in the islands of Britain, because Rome was the first of our known colonizers. There was then the Normans and then a whole bunch of other stuff, but Rome destroyed our connection to the land. And I thought that if everybody knew who we had been, then that was who we could be. And I also thought it was staringly obvious that we were in the dying days of the Roman Empire, and that it would be a good thing to let that go. Which didn't work out quite how I thought it would, but it meant that I ended up teaching the dreaming, dreaming as in shamanic dreaming, as in how we can connect with the gods and the guides and the spirits of the land. And that led me to Schumacher, which was a college in England to do regenerative economics, which completely had not been on my radar, but another shamanic crisis. And out of that, I grew to understand, I had been aware that we were on the edge of real catastrophe, but what I hadn't understood was the extent to which we have a whole suite of answers that could really do a lot towards turning the bus from the edge of the cliff if we implemented them. And that the problem was not one of creativity, it was a problem of political will. And so that led me to come back and start the podcast and the Accidental Gods movement and do whatever I could to change that. And I thought I'd given up writing because it's too slow, frankly. It takes a long time to write a book, even longer to get it published, and then even longer to get it out in the world. And I could record a podcast today and put it out tomorrow. However, I had another shamanic crisis. They don't happen all the time, but they are the big changes in my life. And as a result of that, it was really clear that I needed to bring what I knew by then of having been doing the podcast for 2.5 years. That's every week. So that's what, 150 odd podcasts of talking to people who are at the leading edge of what we could do and bringing that together in a story so that people could get an idea of how it all fits together and see that there is a path through. There's no point in just putting the light at the end of the tunnel. You have to show how to get into the tunnel and get through it. And so that was the plan with Any Human Power. That was as fast as I can do it.
That was incredible. And you touched on so many threads, and I wish I could just pick apart every single little thread that you touched on. But sadly, we've only got an hour. But yeah, I really appreciate how your climate journey is so connected to this process of decolonization and relearning previously lost traditions and previously previous ways of understanding the world, and current ways of understanding the world. And related to
Massively.
that, something that came up in our book club was the way dreams are treated as both serious and necessary tools in the story. It's right there on the cover, dream deeply, that line, and the way that dreaming kind of shows up in the book as almost an invitation to move beyond just
Mm.
like the logic and the data and the science, although very, very important. Sometimes we have to recognize that science and facts can't spark action alone, and we need the
Totally.
imagination, the emotion, the
Yes.
spiritual courage alongside the political
Yes.
will. Um,
Yes. Thank you for noticing that. Yes.
Totally, totally. We had 3 months to discuss many themes, so there's
Okay.
a lot to pick apart for sure. But could you speak about the role of dreaming and imagination in the story, and then also how you see that supporting
Sure.
real world climate action?
Sure.
How does storytelling kind of unlock bolder climate action or systems-based approaches?
Okay, so there are two questions there. One is about dreaming and one is about storytelling, and I think they are interlocking, but I will approach them two separate directions.
Totally,
So
go for it.
the shamanic training that I run, and we're now in the 25th year, and it takes uh, technically 11 years, but no one's done it in less than 14 to do the full cycle. So it's a long-term commitment for people. And it's called Dreaming Awake. And so for me, dreaming is the dreams of the nights and the dreams of the days and the dreams of who we might become. It's anything that takes us out of our head mind and our addiction to consensus reality, which is not a reality, it's a myth. It's a shared fiction that we all subscribe to. And as soon as you begin to unpick it, you realize that nobody really believes it, but everybody thinks they need to. And part of our shared confabulation is what Tanya Luhrmann calls the citadel mind, which is this idea that everything that happens in my head is mine alone. Nothing that I think can possibly reach out to move to anybody else, and nothing that anybody else thinks, whether human or more than human, can possibly impinge on me. And again, once you start to unpick that with people, almost nobody believes that, but everybody believes that everybody else believes it. And so one of the things that we teach in the dreaming and in accidental gods and in the way that everything that we do works is that with training it's entirely possible to begin to become heart mind led instead of head mind led. And I think this is certainly, as I understand it, how all the still what we would call the initiation cultures, so indigenous cultures and all of human history, except for quite a short time at the end in the trauma culture, understood that dreams are a way of accessing everything outside of the tiny bit of reality that we consider real in our separated culture. Part of the hallmark of the trauma culture is that belief in separability. And there's a wonderful book called Hospicing Modernity by Vanessa Andreotti, who is Brazilian, part indigenous, part German. And her indigenous grandfather said that the real core wounding of colonization is not the genocide and the theft of the land. They are both terrible and deeply traumatic, and no one is pretending not. But the core wounding, of which they are epiphenomena, is this belief in separability, that we act as if we were not integral parts of the web of life. And we just are. It's obvious. It's, even within science, it's obvious. But we behave as if dominion over is okay, and it's not. And we spend our lives trying to fill the void inside that is left by that separation. And how we can, and there is no amount of stuff that will do that. The richest person on the planet is on ketamine every other week because there is no amount of stuff that you can buy, or rockets you can send to Mars, or social media that you can take over that will fill that void inside. It's not a void that is fillable by consuming things. It's a void that responds to reciprocal respect and consensus and collaboration and community with the human and the more than human world, between all parts of ourselves, each other, ourselves, and the web of life. And my belief is that the only way we solve the meta crisis, of which the climate apocalypse is as an integral part, is by coming back into heart mind and connecting to the web of life. And that once we understand how dreaming is a way to do that, then that helps us to let our head minds relax from thinking that they have to have all the answers. So that's part one, is dreaming. We could go, it's a 14-year course. We could do that in more depth, but well, that's enough for now. In terms of story, we are a storied species. Every single thing that we do arises because of the stories we tell ourselves and each other about ourselves and each other and our connection to the more than human world. Everything from getting a new job to getting a new puppy to moving house to buying clothes to anything that we consume. It's because we've told ourselves stories of how it's going to fill the void inside, and or our lives will be better. Even the great triumph of hope over experience is every single time it doesn't work, and every single time we go out and buy another box from Amazon because this one is going to be the one. And yet there are also stories of connection and connectivity. And if we delve into neuroscience for a tiny fraction of a moment, our brain knows no difference between a reality that I have read and imagined and something I have actually experienced. My brain parses those as exactly the same in the salience networks and the default mode networks and in all the little bits of pattern matching. And particularly about the possibilities of what may happen, if I can create future memories of a future that is worth going for, that creates, I have another acronym, which is MADE, which is motivation, agency, direction, and empowerment. I need to want to get somewhere. I need to feel that I have the tools to get there. I need to know the path, and I need not to be held back by something else. And if I have all four components of that, I will go for it. I will climb Everest. I will cross oceans with my child in a small boat because I believe that where I'm going is worth getting to. And so in terms of writing fiction or any creative act, films, movies, poetry, song, blogs, YouTube videos, TikTok, whatever, my belief is we definitely do not need any more dystopias. Survivalist dystopias, any other sort of dystopia. It's really easy to see how bad things could be, and it's really, really lazy. As a writer, it's effortless. And every single person I know, and they're all good, well-meaning people, and they write dystopias because they think if I write it and show how bad it's going to be, everybody will start to think like I do, and then they will make things okay. It hasn't worked. It will not work. It cannot work, because unless you give people a sense of what to do instead, all you're doing is frightening them. And you can't frighten people into changing behavior if you don't give them an alternative behavior. If I hold a gun to your head and go, if you don't change your behavior, I will shoot you, you're going to end up dead because I haven't told you which behavior to change and in what way. And you go, what do you want me to blink a bit? Do you want me to speak a different language? Do you want me to flick my left ear? You don't know what to do. So you have to give people a sense of agency, motivation, direction, and empowerment. And dystopias don't do that. So please, please, no more of those. Utopias are lovely in terms of the sense of motivation, but they don't give us agency, direction, and empowerment. A utopia, by definition, is set either in another time frame or another location. Quite often they're on a different planet, or they're on this planet after the end of the apocalypse when the few plucky survivors are deciding that they all need to be nice to each other. It's not that useful other than a potential map of how we could behave, unless you can see how to get there. And that's the through-topia, which is a word coined by Professor Rupert Reed of the UEA, and he let me use it for a course that I ran, and I've used it ever since. And that's how do we get through from where we are to a place we would be proud to leave behind, a place where humanity flourishes as an integral, self-conscious node in the web of life. There we go. That's, again, as succinct as I can get it.
Oh, that's totally incredible. And, I think trying to think about how utopias would apply to different aspects of our work in climate is super helpful, and was something that I kind of chewed on while I was reading the book. I think that, we often refer to reports like the IEA's like net zero pathway, which kind of show us the solutions that we need. But it seems like what we're missing is like a really compelling story. We get there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yes.
I love that. And I also really enjoy I really enjoy having this conversation with you as someone who has read the book and can see all of these different worldviews clearly being super weaved into different parts of it. Um,
Thank you.
Especially when you're talking about the integrity of, or how integral it is to feel connected to the web of life, and then having characters that become animals through dream is so resonant, and I don't know, it's so clear that
Thank you.
these are things that you truly believe in through the book. And I guess on that question, yeah, like the empathy that is clearly coming up with empathy for non-human organisms. Your characters, you know, often offer us a very like visceral window into the more than human through wind and crows and salmon. Um, do you see this kind of imaginative, empathetic relationship with nature as essential to motivating climate action? And then also, like, can you give us more examples of how that how when you think of yourself as being connected to this web of life, how that kind of can clearly lead to action? And is that something that
Yeah,
you really wanted to
sure.
cautiously cultivate in readers?
Yes, yes, totally. Partly because it's how I live, and this book
Hmm.
really arose. So I'm just very briefly going to tell you the how this arose because it's relevant. So as I said, I thought I'd given up writing. I was teaching middle of lockdown. I was teaching a course online because we had to teach online, and we didn't think we could, but there we go. And this was a particular course that I thought way too dangerous to teach online. I can only do this in person. And in the end, clearly, I got bullied into teaching online. And so Saturday night of that course, it was the summer solstice of 2021. And I was drumming for a particular journey because we use traditional contemporary techniques sometimes. And sometimes I journey or have visions while I'm drumming, quite often not. And in this particular instance, I had a complete, clear, plain text instruction, which happens really, really rarely. Anyone in the audience who does any kind of spiritual work knows that quite often it's felt senses and nudges, and you kind of iterate towards something, and you try stuff out and you test it, and eventually you get to what feels like it flows. This was take the 30,000-year-old fossilized horse's tooth that holds the southeast gate on the altar, take it up the hill on which I live. I live in a small holding on the edge of a hill. Take it up the hill, bind it with some ethically sourced horsehide onto a particular horizontal bough of hawthorn that's a bit of a very, very old, this house has been here since Tudor times, so it's a very old late hedge. And sit with that in the small of your bat, looking southwest down the valley for at least an hour as the sun goes down every night until further notice. And it was that it was that clear text. And one of the things that I have learned in 45 years of doing this work is you do not ignore these things, and you don't ask why, you just get on and do it. So it took me a while because it was locked down to get the horse skin. So that was 21st July. It was towards the June, sorry, towards the end of July when I finally got up the hill with all the stuff. And I ended up watching the crows go to sleep every night, which I hadn't done. I sit up that hill a lot, but I hadn't sit up at dusk. And I worked with a crow, and I learned a lot. And one of the things that they told me was that I had to write this book. And they gave me the first scene. Um, and it's practically on the back cover, but the main character dies at the end of the second chapter. So she's dying from the first scene onwards. And part of what was the instruction was then to explore what it's like to, because she's made a promise to someone who's living, and she has to keep that promise, and it binds her in the between place between the lands of life and the lands of death. What's it like to be there? And that's a place that in shamanic terms we psychopomp sometimes, and it's a place that I had been to but not really got to know in any depth. So I got to know it in a lot of depth. And then she has to try and take agency with the land of the living. And one of the few ways she can do that, because she tries, she's right at the beginning, her grandson is probably going to kill himself if she can't stop it. And what can she do? She can't pick anything up. She can't move anything. What can she do? And she has to find ways. I spent a lot of time reading books of how people feel they've been connected to by those who have died recently or less recently. And one of the ways is through dreams. And one of the definite things that if you talk to anyone who is connected to the web of life is that the distinction between human and more than human is irrelevant. And I was a veterinary surgeon, it was already irrelevant. And the distinction between what we call life and the tree or the rock or the hill or the river is irrelevant. Each of them is a node in the web of life. And one of the visions that I had at the start of Accidental Gods was of the blue pearl of the planet that is Earth floating through space, that kind of iconic picture seen from the moon. And around it was a very, very, very complex web of tiny, tiny, very fine moonlight colored threads, because it was nighttime. Later, when I see it, sometimes in daytime, they're sunlight colored. But anyway, light threads, millions upon millions, surrounding the planet. And wherever they cross is a node of consciousness. And some of those nodes are human, and most of them are not. And what I understood eventually from that, this was one of the felt senses and nudges, was that part of my job is to help people to find how to connect with the web of life, because then it's not just an idea, then I am an integral part of the web. And then it's impossible for that not to be the whole of my life. And then clean air, clean soil, clean water become the non-negotiable baselines of how the world has to be. And frankly, if every single person on the planet woke up tomorrow deciding that clean air, clean water, clean soil were non-negotiable baselines, the death cult of predatory capitalism would be over by tomorrow night. It's not compatible. So I think there's a really basic principle, which is no problem is solved from the mindset that created it. This is really important. No problem is solved from the mindset that created it. We cannot solve the whole of the polycrisis, the metacrisis, of which the climate apocalypse is a part, by thinking the way we have been thinking. And we can't. We're not going to solve it by clever ideas, because our brains are wired for linear, complicated solutions. We are pattern matchers. And complicated is pull lever, event happens. Person breaks their leg, we put it together, we put on a plate or a pin or whatever, and it heals. We're really good at acute medicine, complicated, linear thinking. We're really, really, really bad at complex thinking, which is the whole web of interrelationships. Nothing is linear, nothing is predictable, and we can't figure that out. And the reason we're in the chaos that we're in is we keep trying to think our way out of it instead of feel our way out of it by connecting to the web, which is a hyper complex entity. So for me, we will never fix the climate apocalypse with our heads. It is a spiritual question at heart. That. And a political one, and an economic one.
Yeah. And I think the importance of feeling your way out of it is definitely very, very resonant. And my next question is kind of about how we can encourage more people to feel their way out of it. So our work at Climate Reality, one of the ways that we drive systemic change is through civic engagement, through education, meeting local representatives, giving Al Gore's presentation in classrooms, boardrooms, homes, where have you. And oftentimes these presentations do take place in buildings far from, rivers and forests and community gardens. And so reading your book, it really sparked the realization that we rarely talk about where we act, like the physical and ecological context, and how that might shape how we act.
Yeah.
So for those, I guess, like living in dense cities or who are disconnected from green space or feel disconnected from the web of life, what advice would you give to those that want to root their climate work in a sense of place, and especially when that place is more concrete than soil?
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a really good noticing. I was reading something on LinkedIn a couple of hours before we came online, and it was someone who was holding a workshop on regenerative economics, and they were holding it for the first time in a permaculture community. And they said it was completely different. Not that the people coming were the same kind of people, but they had the chance to go out on the land and sit under the trees and explaining systemic thinking and non-commodification and non-commodifying. Predatory capitalism is the commodification of suffering. And it's much easier to understand that when you're actually in the living world. However, if you can't get there, everybody can look up at the sky. Everybody can honor the water that comes out of the tap. Everybody can breathe the air, and it doesn't take much. One of the first meditation visualizations that we offer in Accidental Gods is a water visualization where you can just lie down, close your eyes, imagine yourself at sea. You're the water on the wave, and the wave rises up as vapor. It becomes a cloud. It moves inland. It comes down as rain. It comes down the mountain. It forms a little tiny stream, joins bigger streams, becomes a river, becomes a torrent, becomes a loch, goes out into the sea again. Anyone can do that, and anyone can help other people to do that. Connecting to the four elements, and however much concrete there is, underneath there is earth. And almost everybody, however concretized their city, there is a tree growing out of the sidewalk somewhere, or there is a park, and you can get to the green spaces somehow. And if you can't, almost everybody has a window ledge where they could grow a pot of herbs, mint, anything that grow. Put a bean into a glass with blotting paper and watch it grow, and feel the heart connection. Almost everybody lives somewhere where someone's got pets, and that's a problematic thing, and a lot of people treat their pets really, really badly. But there are also huge numbers of people now working with trauma-informed animal care that is much, much better, and that is accessible. And everything else except the humans are intimately connected to the web of life. It's a heart-to-heart thing. So I think it's wanting to, and this is the key. I think we have to meet people where they are. And if where they are is super stressed because they haven't got enough money and they can't feed the kids and they can't heat and they don't know that they can pay the rent at the end of the week, telling them that what they need to do is lie down and do a water cycle meditation is not going to land. We have to meet people where they are. We have to hold the conversations of, what do you need from me? What are your aims and what are your anxieties? How can we help those? And in the process of helping those, how can we create community that will advocate for the political change as well as the inner change? How can I help you to create community with all parts of yourselves and each other, ourselves and the web of life? How can I help you to create communities that will create participatory budgeting in your area? How can I help you create communities that will insist that the water is actually fit to drink and swim in, and is there, and isn't being put into a reservoir where it loses a cubic kilometer of water every year because they put it in the middle of the Nevada desert? How do we regain agency? How do we bring power to those with wisdom instead of the people who have the most money? And that's every single person on the planet. So you can't frighten people into wanting to engage any more than you can frighten them into behavior change, but you can help them to engage with the things that matter to them first, and you can help foster agency. And with agency comes the desire for more agency, and very quickly that becomes agency with the more than human world rather than against.
That is incredible. Can you maybe speak deeper or give us an example of maybe a success story or maybe even a challenge you had when in this fostering of agency through your many different practices? I would just love to hear about, yeah, how you've been able to foster agency in those that maybe don't
Um,
resonate
don't
with
resonate.
the in groups that we're currently in.
Yeah. Okay, so this is not me, but it's rising to the top of my awareness partly because I had a
Mhm.
conversation for the podcast very recently on this. This is a group in Sheffield, which is a town in Britain, which was an industrial town, and the industry was wiped out. It was a steel making town. They still apparently have fig trees growing along the river, which in Britain is really unusual because of the warmth of the water coming out of the industrial outflows. And there's a group who have set up something called the River Don Project, and the Don is the river of that area, and they think it's the longest river in Britain. I think the river near us is the longest one, but anyway, never mind. They're mapping the whole of the catchment area across space and through time. So they're mapping it with AI to the highest resolution that Google Maps will allow, and the software is being built at the moment so that I can take if I've got a picture of me with my granddad, and here's the fish that we caught when I was 6, and here's the songs that we sang, and here's all the stories he told me, and I've written them down, and look, here's a picture of me with my grandchild and the smaller fish that we caught that now has got 322 times the limited the allowance of polyfluoroalkylated substances in it, so you can't eat it safely. But anyway, that also. And it's mapping the rainfall in the whole of the catchment area and the oxygen levels in real time in the river and the triglycerides, which are a sign of sewage content because we have privatized water and they decide it's fun to just dump the sewage into the rivers, which is a big problem. Our local river now has 322,000 times the allowable amount of E. coli in the river, and you will get sick if you swim in it. And when I was a kid, you could swim in the river. So they're mapping all of this. And Audrey Tang, who has an amazing, Audrey Tang is a whole other person. You want to read their book and you want to talk to them in terms of how do we transform democracy. Gave them the AI from Taiwan, which turned out to speak English. Who knew? They were all very surprised. And so that AI will be able to speak in real time as if it were the river. So you will be able to, for instance, sign up to be a river steward. And if the river, because it'll also have cameras and it'll have all its sensors, if it in real time thinks that there's a bit of a sewage outflow coming, it can ping all the local stewards in that particular area. And you go, hello, yes, it's me. I can cycle over and I can have a look in and I go, yep, that's sewage. Or no, sorry, that's just a bunch of crisp packets. Don't worry about it. Whatever. And tell the river. And it can then have the capacity to issue a river coin, which will be a blockchain, Ethereum based, not Bitcoin based blockchain, which has no value unless the local community decides that they like people who look after the river and they want to give agency to the people who have a river coin. So then maybe it's worth, you can come and have a cup of tea and scone at 5 o'clock on a Wednesday, because we always have too many scones on a Wednesday and they're going off anyway and we'd have to throw them away. So you could come and have that for a river coin. Or the football match, the tickets are worth nothing 5 minutes after the whistle blows for the match to start, but you've got river coin, you can come in, there's plenty of seats, come and have a seat. Or I've got an old bicycle, river coin, go for it. And then I've got river coin and I can go, and maybe the butcher goes, yeah, I like river steers too, here. And then you have a local currency. And if the river is allowed to set up a bank, depends on the government, but if it is, and somebody with a factory upstream opens the sluice gates and dumps really toxic stuff, that river is going to scream at everybody who cares about the river. And the factory will be fined, and perhaps the river can levy the fines and hold them in the catchment area, and then issue that out as a different currency again. So what we're getting is what Joe Brewer calls a bioregional concept, and it's being held together by community being built around people who genuinely care that the water is at the moment unsafe and they want it to be safe. And when this software is finished, they're going to make it open source. Anywhere on the planet, it doesn't have to be a river. We could do it on the hill. You could do it wherever. You could do it in the middle of a city. It can be anywhere where people want to come together and go, this is the boundaries of our community, and we're going to share all this data. The scientists around in Sheffield are so happy because they've never had access to all of this data in real time. And you could put a sensor in your garden and go, okay, this is saturation level. And if I do regenerative farming, say what I'm doing here, and try and build the soil level to uptake of carbon dioxide, but also increase the capacity to take water, then it'll reach saturation much, much, much later. It'll hold much more water. So when we have a drought like we do now, I do still have green grass when everything around me is brown. And the runoff is much less, so the river gets less topsoil flooded off into it. And we're beginning slowly to regenerate the landscape. And again, that will be part of the story that's told. So we can generate stories relating to a place and a community. And then we can start participatory budgeting based on the nature of the economy that we've got in that area. And then we can start, there's another group that's gone in and is doing people's assemblies to set up a charter. Britain has a history of chartists. Back in the 1600s, I think the chartists faced down the government and said, we want different rights. So they're trying to get charters again for Scotland, England, Ireland, Wales, the four nations of the UK, and then an assembly of assemblies in 2026 to see, do we want a universal UK charter or do we want to stay with the national charters, and what's in those charters, and how can we make them become a reality, and can we do it by electing people at the low level and the mid level and then the county level, so that we create a movement of people who feel that they have agency. Because giving people agency, Audrey Tang says you get trust by giving trust, and that's quite a novel concept within our current really broken political system. So changing that will begin to change things.
Wow. To be quite honest with you, I did not prepare that last question. It came to me as you were speaking, and I am so glad that I asked it because I am just absolutely amazed by that river coin example. Like the fact that we're not only giving people agency through this technology, but are also giving the non-human, the non-animal agency as well is absolutely incredible in the fact that it also brings community together and allows for that, mutual understanding that there are shared resources in the community and people can come together and amazing. Love that.
Yeah, it's really
Um,
inspiring. Yes.
yeah, it absolutely is inspiring. I'm really sad that we are at the 42 mark, and I meant to also moderate any Q&A questions that have come in. So so that folks know, there is the Q&A function if they want to submit a question. I already see a question here in the chat that is a little bit challenging to one of the points that you previously made, but maybe we'll dig into it. From Heather Matthews, can't dystopia be a burning platform for change?
No. I mean, simply no. Sorry, Heather, it can't. Unless you give people a sense of change to what and how, it just frightens them. And every single bit of cognitive neuroscience that we know is that if you kick people into sympathetic override, their curiosity it's almost impossible to be curious when you're in any of the sympathetic or dorsal vagal overload. So that's fight, flight, freeze, fawn, fiddle about, faint. Any of those, you cannot be curious. You lose the bandwidth. Your focus becomes narrower. If you just frighten people, you shut them down. You actually shut down their capacity to be heart open, to be curious, and to engage. And dystopias do that. They don't give people agency. And everyone who writes one thinks, well, people will be so frightened, they will think like I think, and then things will change. And it doesn't work. It never has. If it were going to work, we would not be where we are. So
Right.
I'm sorry, but it just doesn't. On a cognitive neuroscience level, it doesn't work. You have to give people a vision, motivation, agency, direction, empowerment. I have a metaphor of us being locked in a concrete box, each of us individually, in that whole separation, scarcity, and powerlessness narrative that arises out of the death cult. And we're chained to the floor, or we're chained on a hamster wheel with this kind of narrative that what we were born to do is to pay bills until we die, which everybody knows is untrue, but even so, we still take it on board as if it were true. And the AI is painting, pretty pictures around the walls so that we're kind of satisfied enough. And then what you need to do is break down one of the walls and show that there's a world out there, and there are people out there who are having a much better time, who are not chained to a hamster wheel and hating every second of it and feeling stressed and not knowing how they're going to pay the bills and afraid of what the government is doing and afraid of the climate apocalypse and just generally afraid. And there may be bars, but you can give them a key, or the runes, I like runes, that they can open the door and you can show them where the door is so they can see outside and they want to get there. They've got the agency, you've shown them how to move towards the door, you've shown them the direction of where the door is, and the empowerment is you undo the padlock that is keeping them on the wheel, or you give them the power to undo the padlock. None of us, I don't know a single human being who thinks the current system is working. What we disagree on is how to fix it, because most of us are thinking with our heads and we're thinking with what's called narrow boundary thinking. We need to get to wide boundary thinking. Dystopias pull us into narrow boundary thinking. Thank
Very
you,
great
Heather.
answer. Thank you, Heather,
I've thought about this a lot.
for asking that clearly.
Mm.
And I guess like one of the ways to pull folks out of that box, as you mentioned, was the whole concept of active hope. In the beginning of the book, person kind of talks about post-catastrophe hope, good ancestor hope, active hope that rolls its sleeves up and makes things happen. And in Al Gore's presentation, he implores us to keep this active hope as well, because he always says we have the solutions to the climate crisis at hand,
Yeah, yeah.
and political will is a renewable resource. And
Yes.
as the title of your book suggests, any human
Any human
power
power.
by human agency can be changed.
Yes.
Um, and
Yes,
so I
I
guess,
think it's worth just unpicking that
mhm,
because this was Ursula Le Guin and it's a slightly longer quote,
mhm,
and she said it at the World Book Awards. So she said this in person to a whole bunch of capitalists, basically, publishers, in other words. And she said, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems unassailable, but so did the divine right of kings." And then she goes on to say, "Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. And often that resistance and change begins in art, often in our art, the art of words." And she said that in 2014. And very little happened, actually, sadly, within the world of publishing. But I think it's beginning to happen. And exactly as Al Gore says, political will is a renewable resource. But I think we need to think bigger than we have thought in the past. We need total systemic change. Tweaking the margins is not enough. And that, I think, Active Hope came from Joanna Macy, who recently moved on into the mystery and was one of the absolute giants of concepts of our time. And Active Hope was the title of one of the books that she wrote, and a really inspiring book. And I think for everybody to move into active hope instead of the denial, despair, deflection that we can get into otherwise is what gets us through.
mm, yeah, yeah, I that really resonates. And I guess in that same vein of needing big change, I have a question here from Marianne Hodge. Do you think that we need a catastrophe or revolution to trigger change?
I think we're in the middle of a catastrophe. Um, we've broken 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries, and we are never going to break the other 2 because they're ozone and aerosol, and they were relevant when the planetary boundaries were set up, and they were something where global governments agreed. So we have smashed through the planetary boundaries. We are in the middle of the 6th mass extinction. So in terms of, do I think it needs to get much, much worse? No. I think I think there is a view that it needs to get worse before it can get better. And I really think that's a very dangerous view to take, partly because it tends to be held by people who'd rather not do anything. And it's an excuse to do nothing. And I think it's a very bad excuse to do nothing. Also, if it gets much worse, the whole point about complex systems is that tipping points exist. And if we hit the tipping point where the oceans die, between 50 and 85% of the oxygen in the air that we breathe comes from phytoplankton. And you cut that amount of oxygen. I used to be an anaesthetist, so we are breathing currently, if you're at sea level, 18% oxygen in the air. If you cut that to 9% or lower, it's the equivalent of standing at the top of Kilimanjaro. And that's not fun. And everybody watches too many survivalist dystopias, frankly, and they all think they're going to be part of the plucky few that survive, and you're not. Nobody is. Complex life will go. There have been 5 mass extinctions before, but I think it's worth remembering that the definition of a mass extinction is 70% species loss over 2 million years. We are achieving exactly that in one human lifetime, which in geological terms is less than the blink of an eye. But the other thing that I would say, I read a really beautiful book by Ralph De La Rosa. It's an IFS book, I can't remember the name of it, but in it he references a medic, again, whose name I can't remember, I'm sorry, but who did the calculation of the odds against us being here, because our ancestors are the ones who survived the previous 5 mass extinctions, and then survived a point in human history about 100,000 years ago where there were 1,024 reproductively active adults. We very nearly became extinct then. And then our ancestors lived to give rise to the next generation, who lived long enough to give rise to the next generation, who lived long enough to give rise to the next generation, all the way down to us. He reckoned the odds against any one of us, or actually any living thing being on the planet, was 1 over 10 to the power 2,865,000. That's an extremely big number. And it is 1 over an extremely big number. So basically it's a miracle that we're here. It's as close to zero as you need to get. The chances of 7 generations down the line being here are extremely small, but they're not much smaller than the chances of us being here. So I would say, no, don't wait. Every single thing we do now matters. But those of us who write novels, if you ever want to write a time slip novel, there's a kind of accepted concept that if you send a character 10,000 years back, even 1,000 years back, and they tread on the wrong butterfly, they might end up back in the present and they don't even exist because their parents weren't born, or something. The ripple effect of treading on the wrong butterfly 10,000 years ago is huge. And we are told that nothing we do can make a difference. And these two things cannot both be true. So it's a miracle that we're here, and every single breath we take makes a difference. And one of the shamanic things that I think I would like everyone to embrace is that intent is everything. Intention is the focus of attention. And where we put our attention is where we get to, which is another reason why I really don't like dystopias. But if we can put our attention on the concept of a flourishing future, what does it feel like to wake up in the morning feeling safe and confident and connected, to know that I am being the best that I can be, I'm in full flow, and I'm surrounded by other people whom I respect absolutely, who respect me in turn, and I therefore have that reciprocal respect and pride, and I know that they are doing their best, and that everybody around me is coming to every meeting in good faith, with integrity, compassion, and generosity of spirit. I know that we're all working towards clean air, clean soil, clean water. I know that we're all doing the inner work to connect all parts of ourselves, each other, ourselves in the web of life. Imagine what the world feels like to get there. I do a meditation quite often with my students where I take them back to the moment before the Big Bang, and then we come forward through the formation of the planet, the 5 mass extinctions, back to a place we're standing, and then 7 generations down the line to look in the eyes of a young person there and go, what do you need me to know? And are you proud of us? And I really, really encourage people to do that. Go 7 generations down the line. It doesn't have to be a blood descendant. I don't have children, but I am a spiritual ancestor for the generations that come on. 7 generations down, are you proud of the world that we left you? Find a world where somebody says yes, and then do everything that you can to let that be true.
Incredible. Incredible. I'm so sad that our time is drawing to an end, but you've captured a lot through this conversation. And so I just want to thank you for this expansive novel and this expansive hour that we've had. I guess to finish off, my last question for you, in that vein of, your attention is your intention and vice versa. Can you share other examples or stories or narratives that have disrupted your previous ways of thinking, and what other climate fiction books do you encourage others to read if they've already read AHP and sorry, I don't mean to.
No,
to
they've already read
acronym it.
Any Human Part. Great. I would encourage, I think there's a lot of non-fiction that's really, really good. So I think one of the key things that we can change is the way that we approach economics and money. It's the thing that poisons everything. I would recommend Donut Economics by Kate Rayworth and Jason Hickel's Less is More. Donut Economics is where we want to go. Less is more is how we get there. And any papers. I just finished reading something called Step by Radical Step, the Macroeconomics of Degrowth Transition, which doesn't sound exciting, but was actually one of the most exciting papers I've read in a long time, because it's a combination of modern monetary theory and degrowth, and it completely debunks the idea that governments are restrained in their spending. They choose to be restrained. They aren't. Governments make the money. So I would pick what makes your heart sing. So I am really interested in regenerative agriculture. Dirt to Soil, if you're in the States, is an amazing book. Read Dirt to Soil. And then go out and see what you can do to change the way things grow. I think listening to podcasts, I know that's because I am a podcaster, but they're very up to date. Any book, a book like this is obsolete the day it's published, because because it takes that long to get out. A podcast literally can be live. So listen to the good podcast, listen to the regenerative podcast. Nate Hagen's Great Simplification, Pioneers. This is mostly American and Canadian, isn't it? Circular Economy podcast is in the UK. How to Citizen with Baratunda Thunde is brilliant. IFS Talks is brilliant. Love and Philosophy is not Planet Critical is brilliant. Point of Relation, Thomas Hubel is brilliant. Refi podcast, Regenerative Finance, if you're into that. Any of the Tactical Permaculture, any of the Regen Agriculture podcasts. Pick your field. Clean air, clean water, clean soil. What matters to you most? Or clean governance. And find the people who are good at it. Get to be really expert at it and get to the point where you can talk to people who find it confusing in ways that are not confusing. And then set up groups in your local area to talk with people. And then find ways to have conversations with people you meet in the street or standing in the queue at the supermarket or at the bus stop or in this doctor's surgery, and have non-threatening conversations. That.
Non-threatening being key. That is definitely extremely important in leading these conversations
Triggering
with the
people is
empathetic.
not,
Yep.
doesn't work. Triggering people for the fun of it is not a helpful thing. So
Yes, I have
learning how
sat
not to do
through
that.
many a bad Thanksgiving dinner with in conversations just like that. So incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time
Thank
to
you.
join
It's
us
been so much
at
fun.
night
Good
where you
questions.
are. Thank you so much. For those that are interested in joining our small group book discussions, I'm going to drop the Zoom registration link in the chat. We read one book over the course of 3 months, and we hold a monthly discussion to chat about that section of the book that we just read. And then we are so lucky that we often get the author to come on and do a Q&A after we finish the book. So I'll leave it to Ella to close it off.
Thank you both so much. This has been such a fascinating and inspiring conversation. We're so happy to have had you, Manda.
Thank you.
For our audience, if you're inspired by what you heard today, want to learn more how you can take bold climate action, we invite you to join our global network of 3.8 million working to build that just and sustainable true net zero future. You can visit climaterealityproject.org to read more about our campaigns, programs, and initiatives. And if you're already part of our network, we encourage you again to visit Reality Hub to explore our latest action alerts and opportunities for learning. Don't forget to stop by the book club group while you're there. If you don't yet have a Reality Hub account, you can contact support@climatereality.com and we will assist you. And again, look out for that link from Sherry to join the next group discussions, and keep an eye out for an announcement about our next book club webinar. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.